Creativity is at the root of all writing. It's at the root of all art. But we tend to forget that it's actually a very common and fundamental human thing. I like to think of creativity as what humans do when they reach beyond practicality and try to do something or make something just for the sake of feeling good, being happy, and connecting. So, TV shows are thought of as machines. People think of how much concept and structure and plot and character art you need. Because you do need all those things. But because there is so much involved in creating a TV show that is rational, that is practical, I believe you need even more creativity than for any other form to make a good, and when I say good, I mean meaningful TV show. But since the word creativity can seem elusive and maybe abstract, I decided that if I was going to talk about how much creativity we need to breathe life into a TV show, to sustain a TV show, I was going to have to get pretty real. So this is chapter 3, how to find, cultivate, and protect creativity.
Now it's 16 miles.
The third chapter was going to be about something else. I believed in an attempt at impressing you, I was going to discuss my grand unifying theory of what makes the DNA of any TV show, what I call the pillars of the concept. But then I realized something. I realized these videos are not just meant to convey information and maybe to make anybody respect more the history and the craft of making great TV. It's really also about facilitating your creative process. It's about inspiring you. And so I realized I needed to talk about the art part before I talked about the craft. I need to talk to you about what it's like to get the raw material you need that will eventually be crafted into something. Basically, I had to talk about what you had to say before giving you rules and limitations. Of course, then I realized that the third chapter was going to be enormous because talking about creativity is a huge subject, and then it became a two-parter. So it's going to be the third and the fourth chapter. The first part, this part, is really about your relationship to creativity. The second part, which I feel very excited about sharing with you, is about communication. How you talk to others and with others and share with others what you've created. How you talk about creativity, how you talk about what you've created, etc. It's a very important chapter because the truth is communication is at the same time the greatest facilitator of creativity and its greatest killer. So, watch that one too. But today, we're not going to worry about communication. We're just going to talk about making art. And of course, it's about TV shows, but I believe it really applies to any kind of creation. And I want you to keep in mind an image I like to use when I teach, which is you gotta draw a picture before you pick the frame to put it in. So everything today is gonna be about raw material, the stuff that doesn't have shape yet. And that's okay. Because I have a lot to say, I came up with sort of a structure, a way to navigate this very big topic. And I'm calling them for now the 5 governing principles of creativity. I like stuff in 5s, as you may have noticed. And so we're going to start with principle 1. Le désir. This is what I call the first writing exercise I give my students. So for a few years now, I've been teaching this 8 weeks intensive training program where I make about 10 people write the beginnings of a TV show. That means I make them write about the concept, and then I make them write a pilot, and then I make them write a presentation of that concept. So what I realized early on doing this, aside from the fact that it was crazy, is what I needed them to be writing really quickly because we only had 8 weeks. But I also needed them to write things that really matter to them, or basically the closest it was to something they cared about, the more I could actually help them and teach them and figure out about their voice and figure out about what they needed to learn and explore and practice. And so I came up with this exercise, Le Désir, which is, instead of starting with what is your pitch, start with writing freely about what animates you. So I thought about changing the name for this English video because I was like, Désir in French can be very metaphorical. I feel in English, you really think of the physical first. Being a non-native, maybe that's just me, but it just sounds more, I guess, sexual than emotional or mental. But then I realized part of the point of the exercise, maybe the main point, was to hijack the normal way of thinking of a new story, a new concept for a TV show. So maybe using a word that would not be commonly used in English to talk about this was the perfect word, because it's not inspiration, concept, pitch, idea. It's something that we don't usually talk about. What do you desire? And there's an interesting word there. It's the you. So the idea of writing about your desire is also to focus on the self, on what motivates you, specifically you, and not what you think is expected of you. It's really important to write something very free and not meant to be read by anybody else, but just for yourself. I also like the idea that starting with desire, basically starting with fire, with passion, gives much more fuel than starting with something that is an intellectual exercise. And you're gonna need a lot of fuel. You're gonna need a lot of fuel to go through all the steps of developing an idea. And then there are gonna be a million steps and a really long time to get the thing sold and made, if it ever does. And then you're gonna need even more fire and passion to sustain it. Because the day you sell your TV show is only the beginning. That's only episode 1. I mean, maybe you sold the plot to all the episodes of season 1, but still, it's only the beginning. And we hope that something will live on for years. And that means a lot of fuel, a lot of fire, a lot of passion, and it needs to be rooted in something personal and something powerful like desire. What I also think is interesting is that when people talk about creativity and getting writing done, we talk a lot about the need for a routine, for pressure, for deadlines, and it's unfortunately very, very true. But those are also negative forces from the outside, and I think it's a healthy thing to really early on think about the positive energy from the inside. Also to give an equilibrium. So I said a lot of things that can be a little abstract, so I want to be really clear about the practicality of this exercise. So this is what I do. I tell my students, writing, creation, to be specific, is not an intellectual exercise. The only intellectual thing you need is concentration. But first, before you craft, before you intellectualize, before you think through everything, you need raw material, you need something that comes from you. And the only way to hijack all your defenses is to do free writing, what sometimes we call automatic writing. So I say, basically, we're going to take 45 minutes. You're going to open a new document or take a new page in your notebook, and you're going to just free write whatever comes up when you think of your desire. Your desire to write a story, to create characters, your desire to be funny, your desire to make something you haven't watched before and you really, really want to watch. And so after those 45 minutes, you'd be surprised what shows up on the page. And it's very different for everybody. I tend then to advise to have a couple more writing sprints, maybe half hours, to sort of explore what you wrote and make it a little more rich, but not to correct it, not to rewrite it, just add to it. I'll get back to the add to it notion. This exercise is something to do at the beginning of a project, but it's also a great thing to do at turning points in a project. When you're lost, when you don't remember what you're doing, you can either, first of all, read that first document you wrote, but also write a new one. Maybe at a different phase, your desire is somewhere else. And you just need to be reminded of where that is and what that is. So this is the first principle, the governing main principle of creation, le désir. So personal is universal is a sentence that you find in lots of different places. The first time I heard it, it was in 2008. It was at a TV writing festival in France. And it was from a British director called S.J. Clarkson. And she was answering, she just made this show, Mistresses, with a writer. And she was answering a question from the audience about how do you know how to make something that people are gonna like outside of England. It was really something that seemed to obsess a lot of the French audience, and the British creatives, including the BBC people, tended to be really confused by that question. And I thought there's a big misunderstanding about how to appeal to a large number. I think there's this idea in France that in order to appeal to the large number, you need to be as non-specific as possible so no one feels threatened. I think American TV has shown that the more individuality you show in your characters, actually the more appealing it is. If you get out of TV, just in general, you realize that most things that turn out to be huge successes beyond where it was made, when it was made, are things that people rooted in something personal. Most writers talk about this, how they tried to please others and to do something else than what they really cared about without even realizing it. And then the day they got personal, the day they got real, is the day they actually started to work and get some traction. So why is that? My theory, I think most people's theory, is that it's about our shared humanity. Basically, to make something relatable to other humans, we have to talk about our own humanity. So we have to get real and deep and personal. It's really also speaks to this idea of the raw material and the craft. We're going to use craft to make this real personal thing that is only yours, something palatable and intelligible to others. But first we need the raw. First we need, once again, the fuel. We need the thing that will be shaped into something that is understandable by others. But has to start from here, which is terrifying. And that brings me to the most important point about this sentence, personal as universal, which is telling your story is not self-indulgent. It's actually your job. That's your only job. You're going to have to develop a lot of skills to do it well, but the truth is, if you're not telling your story, and I don't mean your life story, I mean something from your point of view then you're wasting everybody's time. Anybody else can write well, but nobody else, and that's why this is your job, can talk about what it is to have the same human experience you're having on this planet in this moment. This is what you have to bring to the table. The skills, they come and go. But at first you need something that is real and that is you, because this is what makes you special. So personal, trust me, is universal. Some of you have recognized those words, yes and. Those are the most famous words linked to improvisation. So I've never done improvisation. It used to terrify me as a teenager taking theater classes. I think because it terrified my mother, who was an actress and hated improvisation. I never revisited it, though I know it's a mistake. Because from what I hear, taking an improv class is the best thing you can do for your writing. It's also the best thing you can do to understand acting. Especially for comedy writers, it's really something, nothing basically will teach you what improv can teach you. So yeah, improvisation is important to the creative process, but as I haven't experienced it directly, I'm going to talk about my entry into those roles and the idea of yes and. So my entry is simple. It's this book, Tina Fey's Bossy Pants. So I love Tina Fey. 30 Rock is a really important show for me. Also, I feel like I am Liz Lemon. We also share a birthday, which is... But anyway, I love Tina Fey. I really wanted to read this book. And at first I was a little... Because it's a really funny book, I wasn't sure how serious she was about the stuff she was writing about. And then eventually I realized how inspiring it was to me. Also because it's very personal. She doesn't tell you what to do at all. She just talks about what she did and how she feels about things. But then I came upon this passage, which is this big double-page thing where she talks about how the rules of improvisation will change your life. And it totally changed mine. So I'm going to run through them real fast just to talk about it. So she talks about 4 main rules. There are more rules, different schools, people do different things in different countries, but this is what I got from it. So she talks about the necessity to say yes instead of no, because basically if you're doing improv in the middle of a scene and you say no, you make it stop, and you can't make it stop or the improv dies. So always saying yes. So whatever comes at you, just say yes to it. The second is to say and, which is you don't just accept something, you don't just embrace it, but you build on it. You give input, you help it along, you keep it going. And then the third one is that you make statements instead of asking questions. Basically, you don't spend your time pointing out what's not working or what you're not sure about. You actually just make statements. You build something solid, not something that is wonky like a question can be. Basically, the time of creation is not the time for questions. The questions come later. That's what craft is for. And the fourth one, which is really interesting, is that there are no mistakes. Basically, what she says is that when you're doing improv, you can't stop the scene by telling the other person, oh, no, you misunderstood what I was doing, what I was going for. You just have to embrace whatever the other person understood. So I thought it was brilliant, and I was like, oh, maybe this is like the key to brainstorming. Actually, I think it took me a little longer. I think it took my first class when I was trying to help people come up with stories as a group. And I realized how everything was always put in question and nothing was moving forward. And I realized, oh, wait, instead of saying no every time someone makes a suggestion, why don't I force them to use the rules of improv for brainstorming? And then I realized, oh, wait, that is what brainstorming is. And that was great. It's still hard to enforce. It's hard to do. You have you need practice, and you need to be in a writer's room with people who trust each other very, very much. And that's part of the stuff we're also going to talk about later in communication, and probably in every other video, because the trust with the people you create is really, really important. But what's also interesting is that this works for just yourself. This works when you're alone. Because the truth is, even when you're alone, you're talking to yourself, you have a relationship to yourself, to your writing, to your persona, to your ego, to your past creative traumas. And so you need to be exactly like that with yourself, which means when you're writing, free writing, but later in the first stages of creation and development, you need to yes and everything. I always say, write before you rewrite. You can't question everything like, oh, is this a good idea? Is this a good idea? No, you put stuff down and then you'll figure it out later. You just put as much as you want. You draw the picture before picking a frame. And then you'll be able to organize stuff. But first, you lay it out there. And so you yes and through the creative process, which basically means that you keep moving forward. You embrace the possibility. You embrace the unknown. So Tina Fey says it will change your life because in life, she found that having spent so much time doing improv, she tends to say yes first. And it's true too. Think first yes before thinking no. It will change your life, not just your creative life. Creation is an act of faith. So faith can be a complicated concept for some people. I personally am a complete agnostic, but I've realized that faith is beyond whatever you believe is outside of our human experience and our human reality. Faith is really about uncertainty. Faith is about not being sure. And that is actually a very, very, very common occurrence in life. So when I say creation is an act of faith, what I mean is creation is a space of uncertainty. I want to tell a small anecdote. I love anecdotes. It's actually a pretty famous interview from Ira Glass. Ira Glass is this, if you don't know him, is this probably one of the best radio producer and presenter to me of our time. He has this incredible show called This American Life on NPR in America. You can find it on the internet, and I advise you listen to it because it will teach you a lot about life, about the specificity of the human condition and its diversity, but also about storytelling, a lot about storytelling. And there's this famous interview where he talks about storytelling, and the piece that is most famous is when he talks about the gap there is for someone who does something artistic between the taste they built before starting to make anything, and that's the thing that basically made them want to do the thing, and then the quality of their work when they start. And how basically you're gonna suck for a little bit. And he says he sucked for longer than anybody else he knows. And I think now he's one of the best. So he talks about that gap and how he wished he had known about it, that it was okay, that his taste was telling him what he was doing wasn't great. What he means to me by that, he's talking about a concept that is, I believe, not something I grew up with in France, which is a learning curve. The idea that for everything there's time necessary and practice necessary to get good at it, and that if it's not because you're not great at it at first that it means you're terrible at it and you shouldn't pursue it, that you actually can't know. How terrifying. You don't know if you're going to be good. You don't know if and like taking it outside of a career, but just one project. In the beginning, you can't tell if it's going to be good. You really can't. So you basically have to know that good and bad are not part of the discussion. As I said before, it's whether or not, I guess, it's personal. So other words for it are authentic, honest. Those are words other writers use to talk about what it means when what is the criteria to know if something is something you should pursue. But good, bad, original, interesting, those are words that are for much later. Any idea can be good. It's all about treatment. It's all about execution. It's all about the craft that happens later. But if the idea is not something that you care about, that's something that's strong for you, then probably you're never gonna get, no matter how much skill you have, I really don't believe you can make anything good out of it. And by the way, this applies to writing poetry, but this applies to the Marvel movies too. Like, I just want to say, it's not like an artistic, non-commercial thing. I believe the greatest Marvel movies are the ones made by the people who cared most about the material of that movie. And I don't mean the superhero, I mean the theme, I mean the issues. And that's true of anything that is incredibly commercial, like anything that is incredibly niche and artistic. So the act of faith, the idea of, since I can't tell if it's going to be good or not, I can only tell if I care enough about it. I just have to believe that whatever comes out of it is going to be important. So I just have to take it on faith that this will lead somewhere. I would take it even further. It's not just that you have to believe that it's okay not to know if you're going to suck or if you're going to be great, but maybe you even have to have faith that you might be great. That piece of writing might change the world one day. That's what I do with this. If I didn't on some level believe that maybe this video could change someone's life, I wouldn't find the courage to do it. And it really doesn't matter if it's true or not. I know that in order just to have the confidence, but also the energy to make this, I need to believe it can change the world, even if it's only through one person's life. There's a great anecdote I love from Joss Whedon. It's not really, in an audio commentary for an episode, which is a really important episode in the second season of Buffy. Basically, it's the episode where he figured out how to really explore all he wanted to explore through the character and the show, which is an episode called Innocence. It's episode 14 of season 2. And in the audio commentary, he starts by saying, I want you to know that I'm aware that this episode is not Citizen Kane, but if I don't believe that I'm making Citizen Kane every time I write something, then I can never get any writing done. I haven't listened to the audio commentary in about a couple of decades, so, don't quote me on it, but it's basically the spirit. I have to believe I am writing the most important piece of writing ever made in order to take the leap of faith to actually write it. And then do the really hard, rational, intellectual work of crafting it into something that will then be good. But first, it has to come from myself, and for that, I need faith. Because the truth is, it's super scary to be personal, to not be sure, you have basically the usual tools you use in your daily life in order to govern your behavior are suddenly useless if you believe what I just told you. You can't know if it's going to be good. You can't know if it's going to be interesting. I'm going to talk in the second video. You can't really ask anybody because it's super dangerous to do so. I'll talk about ways how you can ask for positive reinforcement, but it's really scary. And that means you got to be really comfortable with uncertainty and with yourself in order to be in that scary, scary place. To be quite honest, I believe that it's scarier if you haven't worked on your own relationship with yourself and your worthiness and your trust in yourself. And I actually have an advice for that. So this is a book by Brene Brown called I Thought It Was Just Me, But It Isn't, which is basically the first book she wrote. She became famous in the meantime, a bunch of TED Talks, a bunch of books, all great. But this is the first one, which she wrote as an act of faith because she didn't have a publisher, which is really interesting, which basically explains how shame works. And shame can be felt as a big word that means something really like big and specific that happens a couple of times in your life. But from her research, what comes out is that shame is this really, really common thing, which is every time you feel like basically you're not worthy of love and belonging. And I believe when you're trying to write, that's a really, really fundamental feeling. And if you want to get comfortable with yourself and with the uncertainty, you kind of need to work on the shame part and knowing that just being a person is interesting and that just having had any life is interesting. That basically what she keeps saying is you are enough. Also as a writer. Once again, the craft, the stuff after, yeah, that's something that's going to take a lot of work and effort. But the raw material, it's there. It's in you. It's in everybody. And by the way, I don't just mean creating your own TV show. I just mean even if you write an episode for a TV show that already exists, there's still raw material that is yours. Anything, even like writing a summary of something, there's something of yours that's going to come out of it. So it's not just when you do something where you're the only creator. So yeah, work on the shame in order to access the vulnerability which is necessary to take the leap, to have faith, to make this act of faith. This one's going to be pretty short because it's pretty straightforward. You got to let it incubate, which means you got to let it sit a little and spend some time with the raw material before you try to shape it too much and before you share it with others. Crazy things happen when you let it sit. Your mind goes new places, especially if you put it outside of your brain on the page. Then it's like suddenly your brain has more space and can start creating new things, attach new things to the idea, to the desire, to whatever's personal. It starts taking a different form, an unexpected form. So you got to take the time. I don't mean years. I think sitting with something for a month is a good idea. I can't do it. It's too long for me. I think it's really hard to sit alone with something. I question myself so much. I feel like I'm outside of the norm, so I don't really know where my bearings are. So I really need positive reinforcements, but it really comes from a really close circle of people I sort of feel like I'm working with. But I still need time before I let anybody else's ideas in. Even if I need to speak them out and I kind of need someone to say, ooh, cool. If I just keep the raw material what it is, and this is what happens with those videos. Like, this was an idea that came into my head and I was like, maybe I should just start making videos in English and talk about all the stuff I want to put inside the book I'm trying to write. And then I went to bed, and then a couple of days later it came back, and then because I'm making the videos, it keeps incubating. And though I have opened it up to the input of my partners, I still always, with every new idea, need time. This video took longer because it needed to incubate. So take the time. Take the time to let the thing grow a little inside of you. Maybe on a page, but between you and yourself. Trust me, it will become something surprising. So I mentioned 2 books already. I mentioned Tina Fey's Bossy Pants, whatever. And I mentioned Brene Brown's first book. I also want to mention this one, which is called The Artist's Way, which is by Julia Cameron. Apparently it was written like 1988 or something. It's really this 12 weeks recovery program to reconnect with your creativity. I've done only part of it, but millions of people have used this, and it has helped them, not just writers, and it's really, really interesting, and you should definitely look it up. There's also this book by Anne Lamott. I don't know how to pronounce her name. It's really famous too. It's American. It's called Bird by Bird. It's about writing novels, but it's all the stuff she says about the creative process, but also very specific things about storytelling tools are really, really great and super inspiring. If you're looking for something to make you want to write, this is really, really good. And the title, Bird by Bird, is really about the idea of doing one thing at a time and not trying to build the castle right away. There's an anecdote about it. Just read it. It's really, really great. I also decided to make this playlist called Creativity on the YouTube channel, and it has a bunch of videos. This is the Ira Glass videos the interviews I was mentioning before, but it's going to be updated live. So if I see something about creativity that is inspiring, I'm going to put it there. I already put the TED Talk by Elizabeth Gilbert talking about the elusive creative genius, and funnily enough, she's on the cover of this one. So she wrote Eat, Pray, Love, but aside from that, she's a fascinating speaker. And this TED Talk about what she thinks is creative genius and what we as a society think about when we talk about genius and creativity, it's inspiring, it's funny, it's specific, it's engaging, and will also probably shake up some of your preconceived notions about the things. So I really, really invite you to watch it. That's the Nuts Bibliographique for today. I want to thank Marine Legrand and Caroline Liliry, who are standing behind this camera and have been listening to me talk about creativity, well, technically for years, but really, really a lot for a few days. And their engagement, their interest, and their support really, really helped me form thoughts that I really needed to organize well, because this matters to me, and I believe it really matters to you, to your future writing. I want to thank Jenny Lewis because I've been using stuff she's made, music and songs, with her band Rilo Kiley, but also alone in those 3 videos. She's my favorite artist of all time, and I just think anybody can gain from knowing her music, and not enough people do. I also think this particular song I picked for this video is really appropriate because it's called With Arms Outstretched. I mean, how better to describe creativity? So thank you, Jenny, for being a musician and putting stuff out in the world. And she talks sometimes about how hard it is to write and to be creative, and that's also very inspiring to me. And I want to thank all the millions of people who were involved in all the things that have been made to get me to this point of believing in creativity and loving TV so much, but also all the artists that don't have anything to do with TV. As you may have noticed, I tend to find inspiration on all kinds of genres. And so thank you to all the people who did the hard work of being personal and taking a leap of faith and daring to be creative in order to make my life better with their work. Oh, and don't forget to watch the second part about communication. It's going to be really interesting.
It's 16 miles.
So I mentioned 2
to
books.
the
I mentioned
promised
Tina
land, and I
Buffy Prince.
promise you
Buffy
I'm
Prince?
doing the best I
Buffy.
This one is going to be short because it's pretty simple. You gotta incubate.
Mountains with frequency.
No Incubate.
And I stand here with my arms up.
Action.
En même temps, si je regarde mes notes, c'est pas grave, on est d'accord?
Non.
On est d'accord.
Now some days they last